My dear 11th class economic students, Assalamu alaikum. In this lecture, we will discuss pre-1991 trade policy of India, that is the trade policy adopted by Indian government in the pre-reform period. Dear students, in the pre-reform period, that is the period between 1950 to 1990, the trade policy of India was characterized by an inward looking trade strategy, which is technically known as import substitution trade policy. This policy aimed at replacing, or we can say substituting, imports with domestic production. In this connection, a very restrictive import policy was adopted by India during the second five-year plan. Imports were protected by imposition of tariffs and quotas, which protected the domestic firms or domestic industry from foreign competition. The set of restrictions remained applicable upon imports until 1970s. The trend towards import liberalization appeared during 1980s. In that decade, the imports of raw materials and capital goods were liberalized with a view to encourage export promotion. In 1980s, export promotion was given a boost by increased allocation of raw materials to export-oriented industries, income tax relief on export earnings, removal of disincentives, setting up of export promotion advisory councils, and by introducing the cash compensatory scheme, which was designed to compensate the exporters for unrebated indirect taxes and to provide resources for product development. These export promotion measures, however, failed to induce any appreciable rise in the export of primary products and non-traditional items. So, it is a general overview of the trade strategy adopted by India in the pre-reform period. Let us now discuss the inward-looking trade strategy of India in detail. Dear students, before 1991, two basic components of the import policy of India were import restrictions and import substitution. In the initial phases of development, India had to import capital equipment, machinery, industrial raw materials, spare parts, etc. From time to time, it had also to import food grains, but because of stagnant exports, government had to decide to curtail imports. In this direction, high import tariffs, quotas, import licensing, etc., were used to control the imports. Alongside the import restrictions, the import substitution, which is also called the inward looking trade strategy, was adopted by India to meet the domestic requirements. Import substitution means reducing the dependability on imports, that is, to produce goods domestically that we are importing. For example, instead of importing electronic goods made in foreign countries, they are being produced in India itself. Thus, inward looking trade strategy refers to the policy of substituting imports with domestic production and offering protection to the domestic industry through import restrictions and import duties like tariffs and quotas. Two main objectives of the policy of import substitution in India were to save scarce foreign currency for the import of more important goods and to achieve self-reliance in the production of as many goods as possible. Thus, the import substitution strategy of India aimed to save foreign exchange by restricting imports and by promoting domestic production of such goods which the country had been importing from abroad. The India's foreign exchange, which was extremely scarce during the initial phases of development, was to be utilized for developmental imports, that is, the imports of such plants and machinery which is essential for growth and development but cannot be produced domestically due to lack of investment funds and lack of technology. In general, the main aim of this inward looking trade strategy was to ensure the country's independent development, that is, to adopt the Swadeshi principle. Dear students, the policy of import substitution of course rendered some help in industrial development and diversification of India, but the cost of import substitution to the economy as a whole had been overlooked. This policy had good as well as bad impacts on the industrial health of India. Let us first study the good impacts of inward looking trade strategy of India. Dear students, the import substitution policy helped to build a strong industrial base in our country which directly led to economic growth of India. The percentage contribution of industrial sector to gross domestic product of India increased from nearly 12% in 1951 to nearly 25% in 1991. Increasing share of industrial sector in gross domestic product of India is a sign of economic growth based on structural transformation. That is the transformation of Indian economy from agricultural sector to industrial sector. This policy also helped in the diversification of industrial growth. Modern industry was no longer confined to only textile and jute. Rather, it also included engineering goods and a wide range of consumer goods. Growth of the then sunrise industry, that is the electronic industry, and automobile industry is also accredited to the policy of protection and import substitution. These industries would have failed to survive if exposed to foreign competition. Students, the import substitution policy offered protection to small scale industries in India. By offering protection to small scale industries, this policy opened new investment opportunities for those who did not have much capital. Or we can say that this policy offered small savers an opportunity to use their latent resources such as savings as productive investment in small scale industries. New investment opportunities implied new opportunities of self employment, which then ultimately promoted the growth with equity. Now, coming to the bad impacts of inward looking trade strategy of India on domestic industry, students' production of public sector industry led to the growth of inefficient public sector monopolies, which led to no consumer sovereignty. For example, telecommunication, it was under the governmental monopoly till 1990, and during that period people had to wait for years and years just for a telephone connection. As the policy of import substitution protected the domestic industry from foreign competition, it ultimately led to the lack of modernization of domestically produced goods. The prolonged protection did not compel the domestic producers to upgrade or modernize their products. The inward looking trade strategy led to the indiscriminate spread of public sector enterprises. Public sector undertakings started swallowing up the opportunities of investment for private enterprises. Students, if private sector is found to be economically unviable or unsound, it would ultimately shut down. But in case of public enterprises, it is not allowed to do so because it is being controlled by politics. Trade unions and politicians opposed shutting down the unviable public enterprises on the pretext of social injustice to the workers. Gradually, by the end of 1980s, the government of India started realizing that bad impacts of the import substitution policy or inward looking trade policy were overshadowing its good impacts. Accordingly, this policy was entirely revised by the Government of India in 1991, which led to the emergence of new economic policy, which is the subject matter of your next chapter. Thank you.